And thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm your host, Daniel Davis. We have a wonderful couple of guests joining us here on the program, which is unusual because we usually have one. But today, joining us on the Beyond 50 radio program is the author of, or should I say co-author of, Rich Brother, Rich Sister. And our guest joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program today is Robert Kiyosaki and Ini Karisaki of Rich Brother, Rich Sister. And they're going to talk with us today about this marvelous book and what they had as their experiences growing up, trying to find out whether or not if money and spirituality can go hand in hand. I know many of us probably asked that question over and over again as we were growing up, perhaps even being exposed to religion and wondering, is money the root of all evil, or is it in fact something that can become evil if we don't have enough of it? Well, we're going to hear that story today and have a very enlightening conversation about this very thing. And I'd like to welcome to the program Robert Kiyosaki and Ini Kiyosaki of Rich Brother, Rich Sister. And welcome both of you. Thank you for joining us here on the program today.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Now, this book was an interesting collaboration that I guess, Robert, that you put together because of a situation that your sister found herself in years later in life after pursuing her spiritual path and being ordained a Buddhist nun. Now, why don't we go ahead and start there so the guests kind of get a feel of what's going on here.
Well, I think you've said it really, really well to start this thing. We wrote the book for anybody who's ever asked themselves the question, what is the meaning to life? What is my life's purpose? Do I have a special calling? What am I supposed to be doing? Because my sister became a Buddhist nun, after being a single mom, and she made this huge transition in her life. And for me, I was the exact opposite. We were raised Christian, and my struggle was always, is the love of money the root of all evil? And I went on to become, when I made this massive, what we call a leap of faith, both at the same time, around 1985 when we were in our 30s. We made this big leap of faith, and one day I see her at 85, and now she's a Buddhist nun. I'm going, my God, what happened to you? And then she looks at me, and I'm now become a teacher, and I'm a hardcore capitalist.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really for anybody looking for that question, am I doing what I'm supposed to be doing? Am I doing the right thing? And I went on struggling against the Christian ethic of, is the love of money the root of all evil? And some people may have heard of me. That's all I talk about, is I talk about how to use money, especially in this economy.
Mm-hmm. Now, what I like, too, is for those listeners out there who may not be familiar with your particular work, you're the best-selling author of the Rich Dad, Poor Dad series. You created the Cash Flow 101 board game. So your mission over time, even though your poor father was superintendent in the school systems of Hawaii, you kind of thought, well, I'm not going to go and get a comfortable government job and take it easy and just play it safe, but you always knew there was something more and that wasn't a path that was working for you. And before you knew it, you found yourself on your life's journey, which was that it was time that people understood the power of a good financial education. Now, at the same time, your sister was running a parallel path, seeking spiritual enlightenment, if you will. And so you could see how, even though they seemed to be different paths, you were still pretty much asking the same questions.
Man, I love you. You're the best. You have researched this book. I mean, a lot of times I do these interviews, especially, and the person has no idea what I'm talking about. So I really thank you.
You bet.
That's exactly it, because my father was the head of education, a PhD of Hawaii, and they ran for lieutenant governor, and he was a good guy in the school system. And, that saying, the cobbler's kids have no shoes. Well, I had no brains, and I kept flunking out of school because I really disliked school. So when my sister sees me as a teacher, and not inside the government system, as an educational entrepreneur, because I've always been an entrepreneur, she goes, so you're teaching now. And it's such a leap of faith, and we were flat broke in 1985 because, outside the government system, we weren't receiving any money from the government. Same as my sister receives no money for being a Buddhist nun. Mm-hmm. And it's that search for God, or that search for meaning, whatever that is to people, is why we wrote that book for anybody else who's had the same question.
Now, Annie, you're on the telephone with us?
I am.
Okay, now do you prefer Annie or Tenzin?
I prefer Tenzin, thank you.
Okay, well then that's what we're going to refer you as Tenzin, because that's definitely an honor that you've earned. Now, even though your brother was amassing a very good fortune, it was because of you that he was able to meet the Dalai Lama. How did you feel about that?
It was such a pleasure and a treat for me to bring what I had been aspiring and working to all my life, to have Robert meet my mentor. So it was thrilling. But I'd also like to go back to what you were saying with Robert about looking at one's path. And we took this leap of faith unbeknownst to each other. And it was so powerful. It's like for myself, I didn't care what the consequences were. This is what I was going to. And this long period of beautiful, wonderful study and immersion into the practices living in India was really invaluable. However, the lessons that I had to learn financially took a long time coming, and it really took wake-up calls to do that. And the biggest one was the heart disease, particularly when I had insurance, albeit bad, that my out-of-pocket expense was over $22,000 less. And I think as aging baby boomers, that's a pretty big chunk of change for most people. And so writing this book was about having to pay attention to both sides of the balance sheet, spiritual aspirations as well as our basic needs and living in the world.
I know it's interesting because I know Robert and Tenzin, you talk in the book about how you were approaching religion from different points of view. Robert, for instance, you sort of, for lack of a better word, had a cynical view because religion would espouse that money is the root of all evil, but yet they're out there begging with the tidings basket saying, give us money and celebrating it. And what I found interesting about that is I felt the same way as a child growing up. To me, there was a feeling of hypocrisy. We're all nice and smiling in your face on a Sunday afternoon, and then all week long we're going to go and do something that's very opposite. And so it kind of put a bad taste in my mouth. And I think what was interesting is that your parents were sort of much like my mother was when I was younger. They said, well, go to church mainly because we wanted you to be exposed, but then at a certain age, it's really up to you to go from there. But then Tenzin, you took a different path and said, well, this is something that I want to find out more about, and did quite a bit of traveling, but it's unusual that a Buddhist actually has a child. So what was that like for you?
Well, I became involved because of having a child. Having a child, it was another wake-up call with, now I have this huge responsibility and commitment, and I have to take her along in my life journey. So it was really my daughter that was the impetus for my exploration of Lama, the Buddhist studies, and other spiritual paths. But in the Buddhist in the Asian traditions, you can really come to monasticism later on. It's not so much as in the earlier Catholic traditions, where generally young women entered the Catholic order as nuns.
Now, how about Robert? You took a separate path. You became a merchant seaman, and then eventually you were a helicopter pilot in Vietnam. So you came to some of your conclusions about, okay, I think God is closer than I think, but in a different way than I could have imagined.
That's correct. My sister and I were in the 60s. The Vietnam War was on, and she and my parents were protesting for peace, and I was out there going to kill people. So, so we're completely opposite. My sister and I are opposite. We love each other dearly. We have no fights or anything. It's just we're just completely different people. And when the war was on, my mother and father joined the Peace Corps, and I joined the Marine Corps. And I was a lieutenant, and I flew helicopter gunships, and I went down 3 times. And I know the first time I went down and nearly died, and my engine failed, and I went down in the ocean. And when I had to swim to save my life, I don't think you appreciate life until sometimes you almost lose it. And that was such a wake-up call. I went, holy moly! Here I am taking this valuable gift, this gift called life, and up there shooting people and running around the place and not really knowing what I'm doing with my life. What am I doing with it? And then I got very disillusioned as I was there just as almost as the war ended. And I realized I had been lied to by my own government. We weren't there, saving the Vietnam people. We were there fighting for money. And it so disillusioned me. And when I came back from Vietnam in the mid-'70s, I could understand for the first time my mother and father's point of view. It so changed me that maybe there's another way of life rather than killing people. And that's when my search kind of began. It was my wake-up call. And by this time, I'm about 26, 27 years old. And I entered the business world in Honolulu, and I hated it. I just hated it. I said, I can't stand this corporate backstabbing and fighting and lying to each other. And I said, I like my Marine brothers much more than I like my corporate brothers. At least Marines were honest to each other, We were willing to die so another person could live. And in the corporate world, they were ready to kill you so they could live.
Yeah, it seems funny where that root of all evil is there, but it's actually the individual themselves.
Right. But it's also the environment, like the Marines were my band of brothers. They were my spiritual family. And you face death, and I didn't hate my enemy. A lot of people some people hate the Iraqis or hate the Muslims, and I never hated them. I respected them. I probably, I understood why they were fighting. We had no business being there. So when you can see both sides, it kind of takes the fight out of the issue. And then coming to the corporate world, I worked for Xerox, and we were trying to kill IBM. This is ridiculous. What is wrong with it? What is wrong with humanity here? And that's when my search began.
Now, what was it like for the both of you as you began to really feel, I guess, the spiritual results of your searches and your sort of wake-up call, if you will, to saying, this really is your life purpose? What did that feel like for you? Because many people can age and even die, and they just go through life without a clue. And I think mostly it's because probably they don't work at it or they don't ask the question. But what was that like when the light went on for the both of you?
My sister or myself?
Either one of you can take it.
I'll let her say, because, when she says she was a single mom, she was married and divorced, and I think that's the reason. I mean, there wasn't an immaculate conception.
Okay, Tenzin, you're up. Your brother's picking on you. We can't let him do that.
Right. I think it was really about giving back and giving to others because of the joy I had, but it wasn't ever about conversion or coercion to anyone else. And it was forever for whoever wanted to chat about my studies, my travels, my practices. And when I had moved to Colorado Springs for a small Buddhist center there, very shortly after I arrived, I got a call from the U.S. Air Force Academy and was invited to be the Buddhist chaplain at the academy. And so here I was stretching myself again, looking at, okay, it's in service to others and giving to others. So I got to understand a little bit more of my brother's world as well, and going beyond the borders of my own safe little world. So So for 6 years, I was a Buddhist nun defense contractor working in the military and through 9/11, and it was really a joy to young cadets as they went through a very strong military training.
And then for you, Robert?
Well, that's the Air Force. She went to the Air Force Academy to work, and I had nominations to Naval Academy and to the Merchant Marine Academy, and so I was a ship's officer on oil tankers when I graduated. So for me, in the search for the quest of God, my rich dad was a man who taught me about money, and when I came back from the war, I became a manufacturer. I had factories in Hawaii, Taiwan, and Korea, and I was making a lot of money, but there was this emptiness to life.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that song, is this all there is? You know, so I'm making money, I'm going to work, and I'm doing what I know how to do, what my rich dad trained me to do. And I have this kind of an innate sense about money. And so my question was then, exactly as my sister said, the joy came from giving, not taking.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when I took my leap of faith, and I started around 1980 or 81 when I met R. Buckminster Fuller, Dr. Fuller, and he scolded me one day at a conference I was at. He says, "What's the purpose? What are you doing in your life?" I said, "I'm making money." And he said, "Making money?" I got the same chewing out I got in church. But his scolding kind of hurt. It was like kind of my mom and dad scolding me. You know, so what are you doing with your life? Just making money. And then I began to realize I could, because Fuller was a futurist, I could see this economic demise coming that
mm-hmm.
we're in today. This is a tragedy we're in today.
Mm-hmm.
And so I said, well, I can just make money for myself, or I can go and teach other. And when that word came into my head, you know, become a teacher. You got to
mm-hmm.
be kidding me.
Right.
You know, my dad's a teacher. I hated school. And then I knew I had to take my leap of faith. And the most interesting thing is, at the time, I was selling my factories and selling everything, and not knowing, it was like getting ready to strap on a parachute and jump out of a plane, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when I met my wife. And it seemed as it was kind of what you called kind of the right indicator, that God was saying, keep going, you're doing the right thing. And so my wife and I took our leap of faith in 85, and we went broke. 85 was the worst year of our life, trying to start an education company outside the government system with
mm-hmm.
no government support. And we kept going, and I just kept doing what I felt inside my heart to do, and that was to keep giving. And the more I gave, the more money came in. It was the most mm-hmm. ironic thing. But I had to use sound financial and business principles my rich dad taught me about business. So today, and because of that, I think that's why I wound up on the Oprah show and all this. It really wasn't about how much money I was going to make. It's what knowledge could I give.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when I went, wow, there might be a God.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I never had any hallucinations or nobody spoke to me, but it was just kind of an intuitive guide to keep doing what I'm doing in spite of money or no money. So for me, money was kind of the indicator. If I was doing really well, money poured in. If I was being greedy, money stopped coming.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one thing I can say about rich brother, rich sister is what comes glaringly clear. It's almost as though anybody reading this book will get a tremendous wake-up call if they want to improve their lives, not just financially, but all the way around. As you said, it's important to have a strong balance sheet, both financially and spiritually, and you can have both. I remember a quote is that you could have God and a Mercedes at the same time, but sometimes people don't think you can have both, and you can. But the thing is that comes out, just as you said, it's about living in service to others, how you can improve the lives of other people, how you can just say, here, I want to give you this, and not necessarily to just give, but also to share or teach people how to get and then give to others, and it just goes on and on. It's sort of like the pay it forward principle there. And, and here you were able to successfully convey that message in your book and show people you don't have to be distraught following a financial path just as long as you're building it with principle and spirit at the same time.
Very well said. Thank you very much.
You bet.
That is so well said. Exactly. I created this board game called Cash Flow 101 and 202. 101 is fundamental investing. 202 is technical. Now, the reason it's designed as a game is the game teaches the player. So the player learns, but the only way the player can learn more is they have to teach others.
Mm-hmm.
And so what's happened is this board game is now, I think, in 15 languages, and every night of the week, thousands of people are teaching each other what my rich dad taught me.
Mm-hmm.
And that's all I wanted to do. If I could just do that. And it is shocking, the rewards and beyond money that come back. Mm-hmm. It's just beyond money. I'm going, holy moly. Mm-hmm. And all I wanted to do was have people teach others. But the game, and the more you play the game, the more you learn. It's like read a book twice. You see things you never saw before. Mm-hmm. So that's the way I designed the whole thing. And so I'm kind of like my poor dad, a teacher, and my rich dad, who was a capitalist.
Mm-hmm. Robert contributes so much, by this generosity to others. And for myself, it was reaching out and stretching and saying, really, there are too many people that are expecting God or the government to take care of them, that someone else is always going to provide for them. And, as aging baby boomers, our health costs will only increase. It's just a given with age. And so, for myself, it wasn't about looking at a retirement so much as looking at how to give my gift a little better, a little wider audience, and to become more financially responsible myself.
Mm-hmm. Now, Tenzin, what kind of lessons have you learned from your brother that you thought, boy, I really wished I would have had these processes a lot earlier in my life?
Well, I think that it's been a little bit slow in coming, and this is the thing about changing your mindset, because I was definitely one of those people expecting someone to take care of me. I felt like, I'm living a simple life. I don't drink. I don't carouse. I have this very nice life that's taken care of, and I still got heart disease, and then the bills come in. So working with Robert, I see that I have to open my eyes up to the fact that, I'm living in LA, I'm not living in heaven, and I've got bills to pay. It's not very cheap living in LA. So it was just really about turning my head around, and rather than waiting for others to help, charge of my own life. So this has been really nice. I've gone back to work at age 60 and really serving a greater number of people, learning a lot. Nurses and social workers, and sharing what I know, bringing what I know to the table, and it's just a pleasure.
It is. It's always nice that you can wake up each day and say, I just can't imagine what I'm going to give to the world today, but I'm excited to find out what that is.
That's exactly correct. And the problem is, since our schools don't teach us much about money, you go to school to get a job, they train you to be an employee, not an entrepreneur. And my rich dad, my poor dad wanted me to be a government employee, and my rich dad taught me to be an entrepreneur. So I'm an educational entrepreneur. Mm-hmm. And all I focus on is how do I serve more people. And that's why when I designed into my cash flow game, it's a tough game. I mean, it's income statements and balance sheets, and it takes a while to learn it. But it was people teaching people was the magic formula. Mm-hmm. And so I was already well off because I have tons of real estate apartment houses that keep me alive. And I didn't have to do Rich Dad, Poor Dad or the cash flow game. So I retired at 47, and it was the most boring time of my life, and geez, what am I doing?
tried taking a year off in Arizona, as I remember, and found it difficult to find something to do.
2 years, but it was that I was sitting out in the desert, in this high mountain desert, with no air. You don't need air conditioning; it's so high in the heat of the summer. And I said, "What am I supposed to be doing with my life?" Mm-hmm. And that's when I wrote Rich Dad, Poor Dad and the Cash Flow Game, because I only did it from Dr. Fuller's principle of the more people you serve, the more effective you become. So the key was serving more people, not making more money, and that was the difference. Mm-hmm. And when I did that, I said, wow, and money poured in again. Mm-hmm. So when my sister got ill, I'm writing checks to support her, and she really has, as a Buddhist nun, the Dalai Lama doesn't send her a paycheck.
Sure.
And she has to pay for health insurance and all this. And I'm going, this violates the principle I learned in church. You give a person money, you feed them for a day, you teach them to fish, you feed them for life. Mm-hmm. So I asked her, I said, look, I'll show you how to serve more people, but you have to see my world, the world of capitalism. Mm-hmm. So Rich Brother, Rich Sister is that bridge between true spirituality and financial spirituality.
Mm-hmm. I think what's really interesting in our times, especially last year, as we began to see the first of what seems to be almost now an unending series of bailouts, is the frustration people have with looking at, and this is, a perception the public has, these pompous jackasses, for lack of a better word, were out there doing whatever they wanted. Now all of a sudden they're turning to the government. They're going to take money out of our taxpayers' pockets. They're going to give it to them so that way they can save the day for the mistakes that they made. And so you can see at times where those unusual circumstances get people to see capitalism as evil, but there's really a lot more, I would think, good going on in the capitalist world than what we see. And one of the things that really glares out of the book that was really interesting is that you talk about how society and societies at large seem to punish for making mistakes. And you say, well, wait a minute, this is something that needs to be addressed because this is where we begin to learn and grow. And I know in and your search for faith and spirituality, it's the same thing. You go out, you go to church, you go out into life, you make a mistake, and before you know it, the whole congregation is ready to lynch you. And you realize, well, where's the spirituality in all of this? Right.
It's not that balance between money, the love of money. It makes people nuts. And to go back to your thing on the bailout, that's what Dr. Fuller wrote a book called The Grunch of Giants. Grunch stands for Gross Universal Cash Heist. And he was talking about how the super rich and the super powerful ripped off everybody. Mm-hmm. And so it was kind of a conspiracy book. And it's a really smart, short book. I read it. It opened my eyes up. And that's how I could predict this crash coming, is because a bailout is designed into our financial system. Bailouts protect the rich from their fraudulent mistakes. Mm-hmm. And the purpose of a bailout is to steal, legally, the wealth of people in every country in the world. That's why there was J.P. Morgan, Rothschilds, Warburgs, and those families of Europe set up these huge things. For instance, the Federal Reserve Bank is not federal. It has no reserves, and it's not a bank. Mm-hmm. It's a cartel, like OPEC is a cartel. Mm-hmm. And their job was basically to suck the wealth out of humanity. Mm-hmm. So when I read that, I went, holy moly. I understood now why we don't have money taught at schools, and I understand now why I went to war in Vietnam. Mm-hmm. It wasn't about doing good. It was about greed, extreme greed, a greed to the highest level that is incomprehensible to most of us. Mm-hmm. So, and then they made the study of, they made money so complex because it's not money anymore that the average person could not understand it without a proper education. Mm-hmm. So that's why I said I got to start teaching.
Mm-hmm. I know we've actually covered that particular subject on our program about a month and a half ago, and it was talking about Jackal Island, I guess it is. It's off the coast of Carolina or Georgia. I can't remember exactly where it was. And you begin to open up your eyes to the world as it really is, and then when you do, you have one of two choices. Either you can choose to complain and point your fingers about it, or you can choose to get active and do something about it. What do you think, through both of your experiences listening to this show today, a person should do from this point forward? Because these are going to be even tougher times ahead for everybody.
Well, I've always contended, first you have to understand why things are happening, and then secondly of all, what makes you rich are really skills.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you can do accounting, somebody will pay you to do accounting. If you can do legal, somebody will pay you to do legal subjects. But what I was skillful at learning from my rich dad was how to have money work for me, so I didn't have to work for money.
Mm-hmm.
And that made me an investor. And that's why I stayed totally out of mutual funds, index funds, hedge funds. The reason is because they're part of the cartel.
Oh, okay.
I just stayed away from them. And I'm not saying they're bad people. You know, like, the problem is the farther you as the investor are away from your money, when you just turn it over to your mutual fund and your 401k,
mm-hmm.
and then you turn it over to somebody you don't even know and who has no consequences whether they make money or lose money. You know, like the mutual fund money manager will make money or lose money. They don't care.
Mm-hmm.
And the moment you have that, you have an uninterested investor and you have a person who is not responsible, you're going to lose money.
Yeah, it makes sense. That's what I loved about your books, to be honest with you, is that I remember in one of them I was reading where you were on a talk show, and I guess the host was saying, or someone was making a comment about your book saying, well, it's fine as it is, but it really doesn't tell you how to do anything. And I thought, well, sometimes ignorance, I guess, is bliss, but the fact is that's not what you do. More than what you do in your book is that you show people how to start thinking.
Right.
And sometimes that's just what we do. We just mindlessly go about something off of somebody's word. I remember when I was working as a waiter, for instance, in a restaurant, it was interesting to me when people would say, so what do you like here between these two things? And then I would choose something for them, and they would say, okay, then I'll go with that. And I said, you know, it's interesting. You don't even know who I am, but you're going to go ahead and take my advice.
Right. Well, sometimes that's smart if you have an inside knowledge as a waiter.
Yeah, exactly.
But the problem is that with money is, you know, when people just go to their 401k planner, their human resource planner, and they just check, you know, I'll take the Magellan Fund, I'll take this. They don't even know where that money goes. And the thing that they found out was these mutual fund companies were paying kickbacks to the companies to put employees in their funds.
Mm-hmm.
And so this thing is such a conspiracy.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going, you know, how stupid can you be? I mean, can't you see what's happening? But it's, as you say, you know, they just sit there and they want to be told what to do
mm-hmm.
because they don't have any financial education.
Mm-hmm.
Just tell me what to do and I'll do it. And they say, well, first thing you do is give me your money. Oh, okay, thank you, bye.
I think, Daniel, you said it right, too. You know, it's like Robert's books teach people to think because so many Americans just look for comfort, look for someone to tell them what to do. And particularly, you know, we want comfort in our retirement years. And with our 401ks drying up and Social Security being tentative with, 10,000 baby boomers hitting retirement age every day, and Arnold Schwarzenegger giving IOUs at the end of this period. You know, it's rather daunting, and I think people do need to wake up and think about what they can do.
Well, that's what's really important is that, you know, as both of you have said, that people just passively sit back and they don't think anymore. Something comes along to show them to think, and then all of a sudden they feel this pressure in their head like, oh my goodness, my mind's actually starting to exercise again. I can't believe what I'm doing here. And what's interesting is that on the news, and you'll read it in the paper about these stories of people who have retired, they've saved for years believing they've done the right thing, and then almost overnight a situation like a bailout or a bad economy turns and they lose just about everything. And then there's the poor me. And I remember there was a story about an older lady. She was about 65 years old, who pretty much had lost everything and had to almost pretty well start all over again. And what was interesting about that story is how she played the victim. And I thought, well, wait a minute, what responsibility did you have in this situation? And I think this day and age, it seems most people just don't want to take any personal responsibility for any of their actions.
Well, I like those two sayings that keep going in my brain. They say there's no victims, there's only volunteers.
I like that one.
And so when you turn your money over to your 401k plan or your financial planner, you volunteered that money. Nobody forced you, really. Mm-hmm. They can trick you with tax incentives. But the thing that Henry Ford always said, one of the greatest capitalists there was, is this: thinking is the hardest work there is. Mm-hmm. That's why so few people engage in it.
Oh, my. Now, Tenzin, from your point of view, how do you see this from, and it's not to dismiss the fact that Robert isn't spiritual, because you can see that he's very spiritual about his approach to life, yeah. But, about responsibility, because I know you do talk at length about that in the book.
Yeah, well, I think that people have to reassess and take stock of where they are. And for myself, although I took my vows as a monastic 20 years ago, I have to keep looking at it again and again, and it's about being authentic and true to yourself and your aspirations, and keeping that as something bright and right there in front of you. I found myself still on a treadmill, even though I had done what I wanted to do and taken this big leap. I was still finding myself in this kind of passive world where I had kind of outgrown what I needed to do, and I was in this very familiar world. And so when Robert called me and said, "How about this?" I realized I had to take a leap again. And I think this is where people have to be thinkers, to look and see what other opportunities they have out there and how to work with things without harming or hurting themselves and others. So, to bring vitality, engagement, and meaning back into their life and to use it and stop being couch potatoes, and then blaming others on top of it.
I know what's interesting is that when you think of money and you think of spirituality, that we seem to perceive that they are both linear paths, that if you just do A, B, and C, that you'll eventually arrive at D. I think one of the most eye-opening things about what your books have done, Robert, is the one theme that runs through them is money is an idea, and so how rich are your ideas, for instance? And in spirituality, it's very much the same thing. It's about, I guess, the archaeological dig of the authentic you. That's what I believe our search is when we come to try to know who God is to find out who we are. And it was something that I used to always tell my children as they were growing up is, what is the special reason that you were put here? What is your purpose? And at first they would say, well, what do you think it is? And I said, well, that's not for me to answer. That's for you to answer. And it's amazing what children can come up with. And I think, and the collaboration of this book is that it richens a person to realize, let's get back to that self again, where we can awaken and actually begin to take responsible steps and also keep our word, because it's amazing what happens when you begin to share that with the world itself.
That's exactly it. When I started talking to my sister, because I was my wife and I sent checks to help her with the medical expenses and bought her a home and all those other things. There's only so much from the well, and I said, she has her own well, but if you're not taught how to give and with no capital structure for it to come back, then she's just giving into the blind, into the big abyss out there. So I said, I will teach you and I will support you, but you have to be willing to learn. And I think really that's the key right now. As my sister says, that people are expecting God or the government to take care of them, simply because they don't want to learn anymore. They say, look, I'm 65 years old. I lost everything, and I'm just tired. I don't want to learn. Just give me my money back.
Right.
Give me my refund.
I think Bush is coming up with another tax kicker check. And what was funny about what he said about that is he was so true, because it would go to lower income people, knowing that they would actually spend that money and allegedly kickstart the economic system again, which wouldn't happen. But the fact is he was right, that's exactly what people would do with something like that.
Well, I don't know if you know that, but that is entirely the book you were talking about was called The Creature from Jackal Island by G. Edwards Griffin. It's a fantastic book. And in there he describes a system that Fuller describes is what the U.S. does. It goes to a third world nation and gives them a loan, and then they can't pay the loan back, so then they do a rollover. So they give them more money, so they can't pay that back either, but that money comes straight back to us. And then when that doesn't work, then they yell and scream and they do all these other things, and then they give them more money. And then they say, okay, we'll save you one more time, but that money always comes back to the U.S. It just bankrupts the third world nation. It actually robs the wealth via money.
I know that I was just watching a documentary about that. It was about Jamaica, and it was like, when you come to Jamaica, this is the Jamaica you'll see, and it was exactly what you're talking about, is that they go into these countries, they kind of give them what they call a short term, because, the long-term problems are their problems. And pretty soon, because they don't have the ability to pay back, they start exploiting resources. And in Jamaica, it's a workforce resource that they exploit down there. And that began to really trouble me, because I thought, now I can begin to see why areas of the world are getting very frustrated with the United States, because we profess to be this country at times that are out there to save the world and help and heal the world, but at the same time we're sometimes the reason that they're hurting in the first place. Exactly.
I think the bad part about it is that people think it's America when it is the Federal Reserve Bank, which is not American.
That's why I said the United States.
Right.
Because I love the American ideal. I think it's exactly that.
And so what it is are these large bankers, it's almost like a puppeteer, working through the American people. And they're pulling the strings here. So their job is to go in, and the taxpayer backs up everything. If the bank fails, as you say, the taxpayer bails out the bank. But their job is to go bankrupt via bailouts. That's the plan. And you can see it in action today. And that's why, they give you a credit card, and they say you can't pay that credit card off. Well, we'll give you a better credit card. Oh, so you pay off the other credit card. Then they give you a home equity loan. And they don't want you to die. They just want you to stay in debt. That's why the credit card says make the minimum payment, because the Federal Reserve Bank is allowed to print money out of nothing. So they give you this credit card, and suddenly you use it. You charge $10 on it. Now you're paying interest on $10, and the $10 never existed in the first place. But that interest is what they collect, and that's what they do to poor people and third world nations and stupid people. They also do it through 401ks. So that's what I understood as a kid. I'm not a kid. I was in 1983. I was 26, 27 years old. And I went, my God, this is what my rich dad's been telling me. This is my poor dad, a school teacher, couldn't see it. He said, just go to school and become an employee of the rich. I'm going, that doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah.
So that's why I love my dad and my mom, but I thought they were duped also.
I know they were very rich about community service and serving the community as well, and I can see that definitely was instilled into the both of you, but you're doing it much differently because you're actually giving what you have.
That's correct.
Because you're in abundance, and it's funny how people get out there and they give and give and give and try to be so self-righteous, but then they realize they're giving from an empty well, and then they're frustrated about giving because you can hear it in their voices, well, what about something for me? Well, you're not supposed to give what you don't have.
Yep. And I'm always suspicious of somebody who is 100% altruistic, Either you're a saint or you're a madman. I don't know which one you are.
It's sort of like there's a documentary that's out there now. It's called Life in Debt. And there's an interesting scene in there where the Reverend Jerry Falwell stands there and says, if you're in financial difficulty, and I take a look at your balance sheet, I can tell you exactly where your problem is with money. And if I don't see tidings at the top of the list, then that's the reason you're in financial woes. And I thought, well, that's easy for you to say, so the church gets the money first, then you worry about how this person's coming along. And it's just funny, the messages that people receive out there, and they become very confused.
Oh, absolutely. And that's why, when on the book cover, Rich Brother, Rich Sister, my sister's in her burgundy and saffron robe, and I'm in a blue pinstripe suit. Mm-hmm. And I want to let people know that I have no qualms about making money. Mm-hmm. I'm not a saint, and I'm not saying that I live below my means, because I've never lived below my means. So there's all these messages, and that's why I get in trouble, because then I say, well, I don't live below my means. And then all these financial planners saying, you should live below your means so you can buy some mutual funds from me.
You're broker because he's broker than you are.
Yeah. And then the church is saying, well, you should live below your means and give me the money. I'm going, right. Come on, you guys, give me a break here.
I don't think people understand, that temples and churches can go bankrupt too. That all these contributions come from the generosity of others. And if the people, it's from the people, if they don't have the money, then nonprofits and our churches and temples are going to be in hot water as well.
Mm-hmm. Oh, they already are. Mm-hmm. I mean, and what's really sad was CNBC has that series called American Greed, and it's about Madoff and other guys who made off with the money. But many of these Ponzi schemes are run through churches, and they all say, okay, put your money in here, and they got ripped off. Mm-hmm. So they're not as big as Madoff, but they still made off with some money.
Isn't that funny how you see that kind of a thing happen? Somebody's making off with money and his last name is Madoff. I know.
That proves there's a God out there.
Yeah, I think so, too.
If you didn't get the message, it's your fault.
That's crazy, just like in the Enron thing, where they made off with a big thing, and one of them's name was Skilling. It took skill to do that. So. Yeah. Now, what are how does the future look as far as projects? Do you plan to cooperate on something together from this point on, or how do you see things moving from here?
Well, Robert.
Well, a lot has to do with how this book runs, but I see it from my sister personally, is that this book was tough because it's two different points of view. Mm-hmm. She is the real thing, from my brother's perspective. That's why I was shocked when I saw her 20-something years ago as a nun. I'm going, you really have made the change. She goes, oh, yeah. She's for real. Mm-hmm. And I think her gift is that she's an Asian of Western birth, and she understands, she hangs out in Dharamsala in India. So she is a great translator to the West of an Asian philosophy. So my long way of saying, I think she should write her own books by herself, on karma and nirvana and whatever is subject for her. Mm-hmm. But I think she has a tremendous message to give on her own. So my job was just to get her to understand my world, the world of capitalism, and then she can go and give her gift through books. Mm-hmm. That's my plan anyway. I don't know if it's her plan.
Right. I'm seeing that the mind is so powerful, but we have to keep stretching our thinking and to check up on what we're thinking, because we keep believing what's in our head. And for myself, it was this very, very narrow world. And so as Robert keeps trying to encourage me to offer my gift to a larger number of people, I'm having to see, how can I do that and interpret it in a better way. So it's just been a huge launch for me, and we'll see where it goes.
Mm-hmm. I bet it's been an interesting experience for you, too, to cooperate with writing a book and then finding out what this process is truly all about. Have you discovered anything that surprised you about it?
Well, I left for Vietnam or for school in New York in 1965 from Hawaii. Mm-hmm. I never really came home. And when I came back, finally, 10 years later, I'd already been through a war and all this. So I didn't really know my family. I didn't know my sister. I didn't know my brothers. And I was a Marine. And I went into the world of business, and I didn't understand my dad's role in education. That's a bunch of BS. Mm-hmm. So for my sister, this book process is almost like they talk about the lost years of Christ. For me to read this book, I found out what my sister was doing while I was doing something else.
It's been the same for me too. You know, every so often we'd contact each other, or I'd attend one of Robert's seminars, which were always fun. That was the amazing thing, was learn about finance. I think it's going to be way over my head, but it turns out to be something really fun. But it was reconnecting with the love and friendship that we've always had. You know, even though when we were young, we sat across the dining table saying, well, what are you doing with your life? Now it's across, you know, this huge different view of the way we hold our life and conduct our lives. So it's been a great, wonderful experience to be.
Well, I do have to say this because, you know, the book is Rich Brother, Rich Sister, and for those of you just tuning in, we're talking with Robert Kiyosaki and Tenzin, his sister, and they have wrote the book Rich Brother, Rich Sister. If you were to take this book and put it into, whether it's the business section or you want to put it into the self-help section, it doesn't really matter what section it goes into. In my personal experience, I found this to be a very powerful book that really can get a person asking the tough inner questions. More importantly, it helps develop the courage to take those very courageous steps that you need to take. As you said earlier, Tenzin, it's about where you're at right now and then being visionary enough to see where you want to go. And as you said, Robert, from the words of Buckminster Fuller, it's about serving the most to become the most effective. And it's just amazing because so many books out there take a position of ways of beating the system or the secrets of doing this, and you realize, well, you just wrote something that somebody over here wrote, you know, and it's the same thing. But this book really, truly, to me anyway, seems to awaken the spirit and gets the mind thinking, which I believe was probably your intention all along.
Exactly. That was it. You know, as you read it, I think it's almost a self-evaluation. You know,
it's true. And also, we don't know what life is going to bring. You know, when you take a leap of faith and you change directions in your life, you don't know what the result is going to be, but you have an inkling that if you don't do this, something's inside of you is going to shrivel up. You know, and so it's having the courage to step out and try, but just have that commitment and sense of compassion for yourself and others to take that leap.
Sounds like you're up, Robert.
Well, that's exactly it. It is that leap of faith. And I was thinking what my sister said, if you don't take it, what's the price? And what I see, we wrote about in the book, is a person becomes an orphan. And when we're talking about an orphan, is we're all born to a biological family, and then we go in search of our spiritual family. So my sister wound up in the Buddhist religion, finding her family there, her spiritual family. And I was fortunate because I found my spiritual family early in the Marine Corps, and I understood what it's like to trust and give your life for another human being. And then I go into the business world and I find exactly the opposite. So for me, it was to create my own spiritual family outside of my biological family. And that's my company and the people I work with, and we're like brothers and sisters inside the company. And my job as the entrepreneur is to make sure that they're well cared for, that there's a lot of money there, that their health insurance is covered for, and all that. That's my job. That is my primary job. But there's many people who leave their biological family and they go work for Xerox or the U.S. Postal Department and all this, and there leaves that emptiness inside their soul. So they go looking at a church and they don't find their church or their spiritual brothers and sisters in the church. So they become what I call spiritual orphans. You know, they may go home to the wife and kids and all this, but there's still that emptiness. And I think what causes that, or it actually builds up as you get older, is that you didn't take that leap of faith. You know, you didn't have the guts to go and do something because you might fail. And that's what you mentioned earlier about our school systems. They punish you for making mistakes. And, you know, it's not that you make one mistake and that life's okay again. You know, I mean, the reason the book takes a while to develop is because we my sister and I went from mistake to mistake to mistake to mistake, but each mistake was a guidepost along the path showing us, hey, you're on the right path. Mm-hmm. So when my wife and I in '85 were flat broke, we fell in love with each other. Mm-hmm. It was the best thing we could ever have. So today, where we have more money than we could ever spend, and we still love each other.
That's always good.
I don't have a prenup.
I know. As we started this radio program about 5 years ago, we approached it through terrestrial radio. For those, that's what you tune in on your car, and of course you're brokering for the time. And it was amazing because we actually did start with a Christian station. Now, that being said, it was amazing how quick that, I guess, call it spiritual faith, got put to the side when you begin to slowly get behind because you can't get enough advertising in.
Right.
And the other frustrating thing about it for us as well is the fact that you were serving companies and advertising so much that the content of the show seemed to go to the wayside. And so we kind of transformed it and started doing it online and found not only were we reaching our audience more consistently, but our core of what we were doing in serving the community that we're attempting to serve was being served through content. And so just like you said, we made those mistakes and some financial ones, but it begins to guide you into the principle of why you're doing the thing in the first place. And, and I think that's a hero's journey for anyone, but you have to get up and you have to do it.
Yeah, so well said. Absolutely well said. Mm-hmm. It's called evolving. You just keep evolving. And I think the one thing that's interesting about my world, the financial world, is, the Wall Street Journal comes after me, Money Magazine comes after me, because I criticize mutual funds. Mm-hmm. And I criticize people being stupid, just turning their money over to somebody who has no consequences if they make or lose money for you. Mm-hmm. And now it's coming true. Mm-hmm. But they still come after me because they have to protect their advertisers. Mm-hmm. The Magellan Fund and Citibanks and all these guys, they were making fortunes. Mm-hmm. And delivering a bad product. When they talk about your savings will compound, what they don't talk about is the compounding of inflation.
Right.
And then when a mutual fund talks to you about, we return you 8% returns, what they don't tell you about is their fees is that they get 80% of that 8%. So I sit there and I point all that out to the audiences, and then the television station or the newspaper has to condemn me because I'm part of the lepers running out there criticizing their advertisers.
Right, exactly. I know that at times we face the same thing, and then I said, this can't work anymore because we want to be true to what we're doing. Now, Tenzin, in your experience, have you seen what spiritual bankruptcy looks like?
Yes, I've seen it in the way of people selling out, or like I was saying, it's like they didn't push forward. They didn't take the steps that they needed to, and life took over, or they just lost their life in a way. And for myself too, it's like I lived in this safe little Buddhist center world, but I was really starting to feel so unhappy. And so this opportunity to reinterpret what I was saying so that I could speak to other people has just been so beautiful and fun for me. Working as a chaplain in the community with people from all different faiths, I have to reinterpret things for their needs, for their vitality, for what will help them wake up to the fact, as a hospice chaplain, I'm dealing with people who are dying, and yet I can bring some joy in their life just through reinterpretation of my own studies. And I think that in many ways I had kind of lied and being stuck in this thinking that it's like beating a dead horse in a way. But so I think, for many people, they have to take that step again, too, and look and see how am I doing? Am I just being a couch potato in your own life? What are the questions that we should be asking? Because we don't know what's out there, and we have to challenge ourselves and see what can I do to make not only my spiritual life vibrant, but to deal with this crisis that we're in globally, not only nationally. We're making history as it is, and I think that to succumb to depression or suicide in this is just saying money won, but I think we have to really take up the challenge which our history is presenting.
I know it's as a guest that we had several months ago, Marianne Williamson was on the program, and she says, you serve no one by staying small. And obviously, Robert, you learned that lesson very clearly from our Buckminster Fuller. One of the books that you recommended was The Critical Path, and that is, as in saying, the more people I serve, the more effective I am. And, it's just so well said, because we seem to be in a day and age where the greed is hanging there, but I think the spiritual yearning is that we now want to break that glass ceiling so that all of us prosper as equally as possible. And I want to thank both of you for taking the time to be on our program today to talk with us about your book and sharing your philosophies that the world may seem a little tough, but it's not as bad as you think it is.
No, and there really is joy out there, but the joy comes from giving and not being afraid.
Mm-hmm.
So just give more and more will come back.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to punch, throw a punch. You want to smile, smile.
And if you want an ice cream cone, go get one.
Go get one, that's right.
Yeah.
Well, again, I want to thank both of you for being on the program today. Did you have a closing thought for us, Tenzin?
Well, I think that it was a pleasure to work with you. You really had the main points of what we were trying to express down, and so to launch from there was really exciting. I appreciated this, enjoyed this interview.
Well, what I'd like to do is extend the hand to say if there's any way that we can serve the both of you. Our channels are open. We'd like to be able to contact you at any time and revisit some other things as well, because, again, this is about a community that's getting to that midpoint in life. There's a lot of transitions and things hitting them left and right and every which way. And so we try to bring what we feel are the best people out there to say, hey, look, if you can do something about it, then let's do it. And again, I want to thank both of you for being on the program with us today.
Thank you very much.
Thank
you. Bet.
Right. Bye.
And again it's Rich Brother, Rich Sister, and our guest joining us, Robert Kiyosaki and Tenzin. We also want to thank you, the listeners out there, for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. Be sure to visit us at our website at beyond50radio.com. That's the number 50 with a 50. Receive our free weekly e-newsletter. That's right, it's absolutely free. It comes by email every week. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you for tuning in. And remember, live your day past halfway.